The crumpled letter trembled in Faye Morgan's hand as she stared at the approaching dust cloud on the horizon. Knowing only one man rode like that, swift and determined through the rugged terrain of Wyoming Territory, 1879. She clutched her sleeping daughter closer to her chest and whispered, "He's coming back, Lily. Your father's coming back." Faye had never planned on Dawson Reed discovering her whereabouts, let alone learning about the existence of their 8-month-old daughter. The day he'd ridden off to join a cattle drive 3 years ago, promising to return with enough money to start their life together, she'd believed him with every fiber of her being. 2 weeks later, word arrived that he'd been killed in a river crossing gone wrong. By the time she discovered she was carrying his child, she'd already moved west to start anew, grief her only companion. Now, as the rider grew closer, his broad-shouldered silhouette unmistakable even at a distance, Faye's heart hammered against her ribs. She retreated inside her small cabin on the outskirts of Cottonwood Springs, closing the door behind her. She needed time to compose herself before facing the man who'd once possessed her heart, completely the man who, despite her best efforts to forget him, still occupied a tender corner of her soul. Dawson Reed slowed his Palomino stallion as the cabin came into view. His weathered Stetson, not the original one Faye had playfully stolen from him all those years ago, but similar enough to remind him of happier days, was pulled low over his eyes. Intel from a passing freighter had led him here after months of searching, and now that he was close, uncertainty gripped him. He dismounted, boots hitting the hard, packed earth with a thud. 3 years had passed since he'd been separated from his outfit during that ill-fated crossing, swept downstream and rescued by a Shoshone family who nursed him back to health. By the time he'd recovered and made his way back to civilization, Faye had vanished from their hometown of Cedar Ridge, Colorado. As he approached the cabin door, his hand hesitated mid-knock. Would she even want to see him? Did she hate him for disappearing? Had she found someone else? The questions that had tormented him throughout his search now paralyzed him. Drawing a deep breath, he rapped his knuckles against the wooden door. Inside, Faye gently placed Lily in her cradle before smoothing her skirts and tucking a stray lock of auburn hair behind her ear. With trembling fingers, she pulled open the door. "Faye," Dawson breathed, his voice rough with emotion. He stood before her, taller than she remembered, his shoulders broader, his face more weathered. The scar that ran along his jawline was new, but his eyes, those intense blue eyes, were exactly as she remembered. "You're alive," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "all this time." "I tried to get back to you, I swear I did," Dawson said, removing his hat. "May I come in?" Faye hesitated, then stepped aside. As Dawson entered, his gaze immediately fell on the cradle in the corner. He froze, his eyes widening as he took in the small form nestled among blankets. "Is that," he began, unable to finish the question. "Your daughter," Faye confirmed softly. "Her name is Lily. She's 8 months old." Dawson moved toward the cradle as if in a trance, dropping to his knees beside it. His large, calloused hand hovered over the sleeping infant, afraid to touch her yet unable to keep his distance. "I have a daughter," he whispered, wonder and heartache mingling in his voice. "I didn't know, I never knew." "How could you?" Faye asked, crossing her arms protectively across her chest. "Everyone believed you were dead. I mourned you, Dawson. I buried my heart alongside your empty coffin." Lily stirred, her tiny eyelids fluttering open to reveal eyes the same striking blue as her father's. She blinked up at the stranger hovering above her, her expression curious rather than fearful. "She has your eyes," Faye said, her voice catching. "Every time I look at her, I see you." Dawson reached out tentatively, and Lily grasped his finger with surprising strength. Something broke inside him, then a dam of emotion he'd been holding back for years, and tears streamed down his weathered cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Faye," he said, not taking his eyes off the daughter he'd just discovered. "If I'd known." "It wouldn't have changed anything," Faye replied, her tone softening despite her resolve to remain distant. The river took you, it wasn't your choice to leave. Dawson stood, carefully extracting his finger from Lily's grip. I should have tried harder to get back to you sooner. I was half dead when the Shoshone found me. By the time I could travel again, months had passed. When I finally made it back to Cedar Ridge, your father told me you'd gone west. He wouldn't say where. He didn't know, Faye admitted. I didn't tell anyone where I was heading, I just needed to start fresh. And have you? Dawson asked, his eyes searching hers. Started fresh, Faye turned away, moving to the small stove where a pot of coffee simmered. I've built a life here. It's not much, but it's ours, Lily's and mine. Is there someone else? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Faye shook her head. No, there's no one else. Relief washed over Dawson's features. Faye, I never stopped looking for you. Even when I had no idea where to start, I kept searching. Why? She asked, pouring coffee into 2 chipped mugs. It's been 3 years, Dawson. We were barely more than children when we made those promises to each other. Because I love you, he said simply. I never stopped loving you, not for a single day. Faye handed him a mug, careful not to let their fingers touch. Love isn't always enough. It can be, Dawson insisted, if we let it. They sat at Faye's small table, the coffee cooling between them as Dawson recounted his ordeal being swept downstream. The injuries that had nearly claimed his life, the months of recovery with the Shoshone, and his relentless search for her afterward. I followed every lead, every rumor, he explained. Asked every traveler if they'd seen a beautiful woman with auburn hair and eyes that could see right through a man's soul. Despite herself, Faye smiled. You always did have a way with words. Only with you, he replied, his gaze intense. Only ever with you. Lily began to fuss, and Faye rose to retrieve her from the cradle. Without thinking, she handed the baby to Dawson, who accepted her with a mix of terror and awe. Support her head, Faye instructed gently. Dawson adjusted his hold, cradling Lily against his chest. The baby quieted immediately, staring up at her father with curious eyes. She likes you, Faye observed, a lump forming in her throat. She's perfect, Dawson whispered, placing a gentle kiss on Lily's forehead. Just like her mother. Faye busied herself preparing dinner, needing distance from the overwhelming emotions that threatened to consume her. Watching Dawson with their daughter, a sight she'd never imagined possible, was both beautiful and painful. She had spent so long convincing herself she was better off without him, that his memory was enough. Now, with him sitting at her table holding their child, those carefully constructed walls were beginning to crumble. As the evening progressed, Dawson reluctantly prepared to leave. I've taken a room at the boarding house in town, he explained. I don't want to impose on you. Will you be staying long? Faye asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. I'm not leaving again, Dawson said firmly. Not unless you tell me to go, and even then I won't be far. I've missed too much of Lily's life already. I won't miss any more, Faye nodded, understanding his determination. You can come tomorrow, spend time with her, and with you, he asked hesitantly, Dawson. I know I have no right to ask, he said quickly. But I'd like the chance to know the woman you've become, not just the girl I left behind. Faye opened the door, the cool evening air rushing in. One day at a time, she said finally. That's all I can promise. Dawson placed his hat on his head, nodding. One day is more than I had yesterday. Good night, Faye. As he mounted his horse and rode toward town, Faye watched until the darkness swallowed him. Only then did she allow the tears she'd been holding back to fall freely. The next morning, Faye was hanging laundry when Dawson arrived, leading his palomino and a second horse, a gentle-looking bay mare. Good morning, he called, tethering both horses to the hitching post. I brought something for Lily. From his saddlebag he produced a small wooden horse, intricately carved and sanded smooth. I made it last night, he explained, somewhat sheepishly. Couldn't sleep much thinking about her, about both of you. Faye accepted the toy, running her fingers over the polished surface. It's beautiful, Dawson. She'll love it. And this, he continued, reaching for the bay mare's reins, is for you. I noticed you don't have a horse and town's a fair distance. Faye stared at the mare in disbelief. I can't accept a horse, Dawson. Her name's Sadie, he pressed on. She's gentle but sure-footed. Good with loud noises, too, which might come in handy with a baby around. Dawson, please, he interrupted. Not as a gift, if that makes you uncomfortable. Consider her on loan. For Lily's sake, if not your own. Faye approached the mare cautiously, stroking her velvet nose. The horse nickered softly, pushing against her hand. She likes you already, Dawson observed, a smile playing at his lips. Faye sighed, relenting. On loan, then, thank you. They spent the day together, an awkward dance of rediscovery. Dawson mended the sagging porch step, chopped enough firewood to last a month, and cleared brush from around the cabin while Faye tended to Lily and prepared meals. They moved around each other carefully, like two people relearning a dance they once knew by heart. As the sun began to set, Dawson sat on the porch, bouncing Lily on his knee. The baby giggled delightedly, reaching for his face with pudgy hands. She's got your laugh, he said as Faye joined them. Light and musical, like the wind through aspen leaves, Faye smiled, settling beside him. I was thinking she has your stubbornness. When she decides she wants something, heaven help anyone who stands in her way, Dawson chuckled. Like mother, like daughter. I was never stubborn, Faye protested. No, what about the time you decided you wanted to learn to shoot and wouldn't take no for an answer? Or when you insisted on riding bareback through town just because someone said ladies shouldn't, Faye laughed, the sound surprising her. It had been so long since she'd laughed freely. Well, you were just as bad challenging Hank Miller to a race after he said your horse wasn't worth the hay it ate. And I won, didn't I? Dawson grinned, the years falling away between them. You did, Faye acknowledged. Just like you won your hat back after I stole it that day at the creek. The memory hung between them. Faye, 18 and daring, snatching Dawson's prized Stetson and racing away on horseback. Dawson, 20 and smitten, chasing her through meadows until they collapsed, breathless and laughing, beside the creek where he'd first kissed her. I never really won it back, Dawson said softly. You gave it to me along with your heart. Faye looked away, the memory too tender. That was a lifetime ago. It doesn't have to be just a memory, Dawson said, shifting Lily to his other knee. We could build new ones, the three of us. It's not that simple, Faye replied, standing. You can't just walk back into my life after 3 years and expect everything to be as it was. I don't expect that, Dawson assured her. I know we're different people now. I know it will take time. I'm just asking for a chance, Faye. A chance to be a father to Lily and maybe someday more to you. Faye took Lily from him, cradling her daughter close. It's getting late. You should head back to town before dark. Dawson nodded, recognizing the dismissal. He stood, placing his hat on his head. I'll be back tomorrow, if that's all right. Tomorrow, Faye agreed, watching as he untethered his palomino, leaving the bay mare behind as promised. As days turned into weeks, a routine developed. Dawson would arrive early, spending the day with Lily while helping around the cabin. Sometimes they'd ride into town together, Lily secured in front of Faye on Sadie, Dawson beside them on his palomino. The townspeople quickly recognized them as a family, though Faye was careful to correct anyone who referred to Dawson as her husband. One afternoon, as Lily napped and Dawson repaired a section of fence, Faye brought him a glass of lemonade. You don't have to do all this work, she said, watching as he drove a post into the ground with powerful strikes of a mallet. Dawson paused, wiping sweat from his brow. I want to. This place needs a man's touch. I've managed just fine on my own, Faye replied, her pride stinging. I didn't mean it like that, Dawson said quickly. I know you're capable, Faye. You're the strongest woman I've ever known, but you shouldn't have to do everything alone. Faye sat on a nearby stump, smoothing her skirts. Why did you really come looking for me, Dawson? The truth. Dawson set down the mallet, accepting the lemonade and drinking deeply before answering. When I was lying injured, fever burning through me, your face was what kept me holding on. The thought of seeing you again gave me the strength to fight. After I recovered, finding you became my only purpose. He looked at her intently. I never expected to discover I had a daughter. That's a miracle I never dared hope for. But even without knowing about Lily, I would have searched for you until my dying day. And now that you've found us, Faye asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Now I want to be the man you deserve, Dawson answered simply. The father Lily deserves if you'll let me. Before Faye could respond, a rider approached, kicking up dust as he galloped toward the cabin. Dawson instinctively moved to stand between Faye and the newcomer, his posture tense and protective. The rider, a young man barely out of his teens, reined in his lathered horse. Miss Morgan. There's trouble in town. Doc Sanders sent me to fetch you, says he needs your help with the Wilkins boy, he's taken a bad turn. Faye stood immediately. Tell him I'm coming. She turned to Dawson. Tommy Wilkins has typhoid. I've been helping the doctor care for him and the others. Others. Dawson asked, concern etching his features. 3 families have it now. The doctor thinks it's from the well behind the mercantile. Faye hurried toward the cabin. I need to get my things. What about Lily? Dawson called after her. Faye paused, torn. She'd been helping with the sick for over a week, returning home each night to Lily, but had yet to leave her daughter for an extended period. You can stay with her, she decided. There's milk in the spring house. She should sleep through the afternoon, but if she wakes, I'll take care of her, Dawson assured her. Go, help the boy. Faye gathered her medical supplies, herbs, tinctures, and clean bandages she kept on hand and quickly saddled Sadie. I'll be back as soon as I can, she promised. Dawson helped her mount, his hand lingering on hers. Be careful, Faye, typhoid is dangerous. I'll be careful, she said, touched by his concern. With a final glance toward the cabin where Lily slept, she rode away with the messenger. Hours stretched into the evening as Dawson cared for Lily, his inexperience evident but his devotion unwavering. He fed her, changed her, and read to her from one of Faye's books, delighting in her smiles and babbling responses. When she grew fussy, he carried her outside, pointing out stars as they appeared in the darkening sky. That bright one there is the North Star, he explained, knowing she couldn't understand but speaking to her as if she could. Your mama's like that star, steady and true, a light to follow when the way seems dark. Midnight came and went with no sign of Faye. Dawson paced the cabin, worry gnawing at him. He'd settled Lily in her cradle, but sleep eluded him. Finally, just before dawn, the sound of hoofbeats approached. Faye dismounted wearily, her dress stained and her face drawn with exhaustion. Dawson was outside immediately, taking Sadie's reins and helping Faye toward the cabin. Tommy, he asked gently. Faye shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. We lost him an hour ago. His mother hasn't stopped screaming. She leaned into Dawson's strength, too tired to maintain her usual distance. The Hendersons' youngest is worsening too. The doctor thinks we'll lose more before it's done. Inside, Faye moved immediately to check on Lily, relieved to find her sleeping peacefully. How was she? She asked, her voice hoarse from hours of providing comfort to grieving families. Perfect, Dawson assured her. She missed you, but we managed. You should rest now. Faye nodded, swaying slightly with fatigue. Without asking permission, Dawson guided her to her bed, helping her remove her boots. Sleep, he insisted. I'll watch over Lily. Too exhausted to protest, Faye surrendered to sleep. When she woke several hours later, she found Dawson at the table, Lily in his lap, teaching her to stack wooden blocks. You're still here, Faye observed, pushing herself upright. Where else would I be? Dawson replied, as if the answer were obvious. Over the next 2 weeks, the typhoid outbreak worsened. Faye spent most days in town helping Doc Sanders tend to the sick, while Dawson remained at the cabin with Lily. Each night, Faye returned more exhausted than the last, bearing news of new cases or, more tragically, deaths. Dawson proved himself invaluable during this time, not only caring for Lily with increasing confidence, but ensuring Faye ate and rested when she was home. He never complained about the long hours alone with the baby, instead treasuring the time to bond with his daughter and proving his commitment to both Lily and Faye. One evening, Faye returned to find Dawson had constructed a small wooden rocking horse for Lily, complete with real horsehair for its mane and tail. "She's too young for it now," he explained as Faye examined the exquisite craftsmanship, "but she'll grow into it." The simple statement, the assumption of a future together, brought tears to Faye's eyes. "Dawson," she began, her voice thick with emotion, "what happens when the outbreak is over?" "What do you mean?" he asked, setting aside the bridle he was repairing. "Will you stay? Or move on to the next town, the next adventure?" Faye's question revealed the fears she'd been harboring that Dawson's interest might wane once the novelty of fatherhood wore off. Dawson crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Faye Morgan, I am exactly where I want to be, where I need to be. With you and Lily. But your restlessness, your need for freedom, it's what took you away before," Faye reminded him, withdrawing her hands. "I was a boy then," Dawson replied, his voice steady, "a boy who thought adventure meant riding with a cattle drive. Now I'm a man who knows the greatest adventure is watching his daughter grow, being beside the woman he loves." "Love," Faye echoed, the word both familiar and frightening. "You speak of it so easily." "Because it is easy. Loving you has always been the easiest thing I've ever done," Dawson insisted. "It's living without you that was impossible." Before Faye could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. It was Ben Turner, the town's mayor. "Miss Morgan, Reed," he greeted them solemnly. "I'm afraid I bring troubling news. Doc Sanders has taken ill with the typhoid. He's asking for you, Miss Morgan." Faye paled. "The doctor. But he was fine this morning," came on sudden like, Turner explained. "With him down, you're the closest thing to a medical person we've got. The situation in town is dire, Miss Morgan. We need your help more than ever." Faye looked to Dawson, conflict evident in her expression. "Lily will be safe with me," Dawson finished firmly. "Go, the town needs you." After Turner departed, Faye gathered her supplies with shaking hands. "If the doctor has fallen ill, things are worse than I thought." "Faye," Dawson said, his tone grave, "promise me you'll be careful, take precautions. Lily needs her mother." "I will," she promised, pausing before adding softly, "and I need you to keep our daughter safe." "With my life," Dawson vowed, the intensity in his eyes leaving no doubt of his sincerity. For the next several days, Faye remained in town, sending occasional notes to Dawson with updates on the outbreak and instructions for Lily's care. The situation had grown desperate, with nearly a quarter of the town's residents ill, and several more deaths recorded. Dawson maintained the cabin, cared for Lily, and worried constantly about Faye. He began riding into town each evening, bringing food and clean clothes for Faye, but not staying long, fearful of exposing Lily to the illness if he became a carrier. On the 5th day, Dawson arrived in town to find chaos. The makeshift hospital in the town hall was overflowing, with patients lying on pallets in every available space. Volunteers moved among them, offering water and comfort, but the shortage of medical knowledge was evident. He found Faye kneeling beside Doc Sanders, whose condition had deteriorated rapidly. Her face was drawn, dark circles shadowing her eyes, but her hands remained steady as she bathed the doctor's fevered brow. "Faye," Dawson called softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, relief washing over her features. "Dawson, Lily, she's with Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house," he explained. "I needed to see you to help somehow." Faye rose, swaying slightly with exhaustion. Dawson caught her elbow, supporting her. "You need rest," he insisted. "There's no time," Faye argued weakly. "The doctor, he's failing, Dawson, and there are so many others." "You can't help anyone if you collapse," Dawson countered. "Let me take you to the hotel for a few hours' sleep." "I can't leave them," Faye protested, but her resolve was clearly weakening. "Just a few hours," Dawson pressed. "I'll stay here, do whatever needs doing. Mrs. Peterson will watch Lily a while longer." Too exhausted to argue further, Faye allowed Dawson to guide her to the small hotel across the street. The proprietor, recognizing Faye's essential role in fighting the outbreak, immediately offered a room. "Sleep," Dawson instructed, helping her to the bed. "I'll wake you if there's any change with the doctor." Faye caught his hand as he turned to leave. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Dawson returned to the town hall, rolling up his sleeves and throwing himself into the work Faye had been handling alone. He changed bedding, helped patients drink, and followed the instructions of the more experienced volunteers. Hours passed as he moved from patient to patient, witnessing both improvement and decline, life and death playing out before his eyes. Around midnight, Doc Sanders regained consciousness briefly, beckoning Dawson closer. "Reed," the doctor rasped, his voice barely audible. "Where's Faye?" "Resting," Dawson replied, offering the doctor water. "She was exhausted." Sanders nodded weakly. "Good, she's been running herself into the ground, that woman. She's worth her weight in gold, saved more lives than I could have alone." "She's extraordinary," Dawson agreed. "You love her," the doctor observed, his fever-bright eyes surprisingly perceptive. "More than life," Dawson admitted. "Then don't waste time," Sanders advised, each word clearly an effort. "This outbreak, it shows how fragile life is. Don't wait to tell her." Before Dawson could respond, the doctor drifted back into unconsciousness. Troubled by the encounter, Dawson continued his work, more determined than ever to ease Faye's burden. Dawn was breaking when Faye returned to the town hall, looking somewhat restored after a few hours' sleep. She found Dawson comforting a young woman whose husband had just passed away, his gentle words and strong presence providing solace where none seemed possible. Watching him, Faye felt something shift within her, the last of her resistance crumbling in the face of his unwavering compassion and strength. This was not the impulsive boy who had left her 3 years ago, but a man who had faced hardship and emerged with deeper character, greater purpose. The day passed in a blur of activity as Faye resumed her duties, but now with Dawson's steady support. Together they tended to patients, celebrated small victories, and mourned those they couldn't save. When evening came, Dawson insisted on retrieving Lily from Mrs. Peterson and bringing her to the hotel where Faye could see her, if only briefly. The reunion was emotional, with Faye holding Lily close, tears streaming down her face as she inhaled her daughter's sweet scent. "I've missed you so much," she whispered against the baby's soft hair. "She's missed you too," Dawson said, watching the two most important people in his world. "She looks for you every time the door opens." "It won't be much longer," Faye promised, though whether to Lily or herself wasn't clear. "The worst seems to be passing, fewer new cases today." "And Doc Sanders?" Dawson asked. "Improving," Faye confirmed. "His fever broke this afternoon. He's weak, but I think he'll recover." "That's good news," Dawson said, relief evident in his voice. "The town needs him." "The town needs both of us," Faye replied, surprising herself with the inclusion of Dawson in that statement. But it was true. Over the past days, he had become essential to the town's recovery efforts, just as he had become essential to her own life again. As another week passed, the typhoid outbreak gradually subsided. New cases became rare, and most of those already ill began to recover. Doc Sanders, though still weak, resumed limited duties, allowing Faye to return home to the cabin with Lily. Dawson continued to assist in town, helping families who had lost breadwinners to the disease, repairing damage to neglected properties, and organizing a community effort to seal the contaminated well that had caused the outbreak. One evening, he returned to the cabin later than usual, tired but satisfied with the day's work. He found Faye sitting on the porch, watching the sunset with Lily asleep in her arms. "You're a hero in town," Faye said as he approached. "Everyone's singing your praises." Dawson shrugged, embarrassed by the recognition. "I just did what needed doing." "No," Faye contradicted him. "You did more. You gave people hope when they had none. You showed strength when others faltered." "I learned from the best," Dawson replied, settling beside her on the porch step. "Watching you these past weeks, your courage, your compassion, I've never been prouder to know someone." Faye smiled, the expression transforming her tired face. "We make a good team, don't we?" "The best," Dawson agreed, his heart swelling with hope at her use of we. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. Lily slept peacefully, unaware of the significant moment unfolding between her parents. "Dawson," Faye said finally, her voice soft in the gathering dusk. "I've been thinking about what happens now. And," he prompted gently, hardly daring to breathe. "And I think it's time we stopped pretending we're just two people who happen to share a child." Faye turned to face him, vulnerability and determination mingling in her expression. "The truth is, I never stopped loving you either. Even when I thought you were gone forever, even when I was angriest at you for leaving, my heart was still yours." Dawson reached for her hand, his own trembling slightly. "Faye Morgan, are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I want us to be a family," Faye clarified. "You, me, and Lily. I'm saying I'm ready to trust you again, to build a life with you." Joy surged through Dawson, pure and overwhelming. "Are you sure? I don't want to rush you," Faye laughed softly. "Dawson Reed, you've been back in my life for nearly 2 months. You've proven yourself a dozen times over. If that's rushing, then yes, I'm sure." Unable to contain his happiness, Dawson leaned forward, careful of Lily between them, and pressed his lips to Faye's. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened as years of separation and longing melted away. When they finally parted, both breathless, Dawson rested his forehead against Faye's. "I should have done that the moment I found you." "I would have slapped you," Faye teased, her eyes sparkling in the fading light. "Worth it," Dawson grinned, kissing her again briefly. That night, after Lily was settled in her cradle, Dawson and Faye sat at the table, planning their future together. Unlike the impulsive dreams of their youth, these plans were practical, grounded in the reality of their lives now. "I've saved most of what I earned these past years," Dawson explained. "Enough to buy a small ranch if that's what you want, or we could stay here, expand this place." "I'd like to stay," Faye decided. "I've grown attached to this cabin, to the community, especially after what we've all been through together." "Then we'll stay," Dawson agreed easily. "I can build an addition, another bedroom for Lily as she grows, maybe a proper kitchen for you." "And a workshop for you," Faye added. "I've seen how your hands itch to create when they're idle." Dawson smiled, touched by her consideration. "There's something else we should discuss," he said, his expression growing serious. "Something important." Faye tensed slightly. "What is it?" Reaching into his pocket, Dawson withdrew a small object and placed it on the table between them, a simple gold band, worn but well cared for. "This was my mother's," he explained. "I've carried it with me since she passed, waiting for the right time, the right woman." Faye stared at the ring, her heart racing. "Dawson." "I'm not asking right this minute," he assured her, covering her hand with his. "I know we need time to readjust, to be sure, but I want you to know that when you're ready, whether that's a week from now or a year, this belongs to you." It always has. Tears welled in Faye's eyes as she turned her hand to intertwine her fingers with his. "I don't need a year," she whispered. "I don't even need a week." "Faye," Dawson breathed, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Are you saying, ask me properly?" she interrupted, a smile breaking through her tears. "A girl likes to be asked properly." Dawson stood, moving around the table to kneel before her. Taking her hand in his, he looked up into the face he had dreamed of for 3 long years. "Faye Morgan, from the moment you stole my hat and raced away laughing, you've owned my heart completely. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Faye answered without hesitation. "Yes, Dawson Reed, I will marry you." Slipping the ring onto her finger, Dawson rose to gather her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his exuberance. Their laughter woke Lily, who joined the celebration with happy babbling of her own. The next morning, Dawson rode into town to share their news with Doc Sanders, who had become a friend during the outbreak. The doctor, still recovering but much improved, insisted on hosting the wedding at his spacious home once he was fully recovered. "That woman deserves a proper celebration," Sanders declared. "After everything she's done for this town, it's the least we can offer." Word of the engagement spread quickly through Cottonwood Springs. The town, still healing from the devastating outbreak, embraced the opportunity to celebrate something joyful. Offers of help poured in from Mrs. Turner's promise of a wedding cake to the seamstress's offer to create Faye's dress at no charge. When Dawson returned to the cabin with news of the town's generosity, Faye was overwhelmed. "They don't need to do all this," she protested. "A simple ceremony would be fine." "They want to," Dawson explained, lifting Lily into his arms. "You became their guardian angel during the outbreak." "They want to show their appreciation." "We both did," Faye corrected him. "You were just as involved." "Either way," Dawson said, pressing a kiss to her forehead, "the town has decided our wedding will be a community celebration. I'm afraid we have no say in the matter." Over the next few weeks, preparations for the wedding progressed alongside Dawson's work on expanding the cabin. With help from several men in town, he added a second bedroom for Lily, a larger kitchen for Faye, and a covered porch that wrapped around two sides of the cabin. Faye, meanwhile, divided her time between caring for Lily, assisting Doc Sanders with his remaining typhoid patients, and reluctantly submitting to fittings for her wedding dress. Though unused to being the center of attention, she found herself touched by the community's investment in their happiness. One afternoon, as Faye was gathering wildflowers with Lily, she noticed a rider approaching from the direction of town. Recognizing Dawson's friend Jack Montgomery, who had arrived in Cottonwood Springs a week earlier to help with the cabin expansion, she waved in greeting. "Afternoon, Miss Morgan," Jack called, tipping his hat. "Dawson asked me to fetch you both. Says he has a surprise waiting in town." Curious, Faye gathered Lily and mounted Sadie, following Jack toward Cottonwood Springs. As they approached the main street, she was surprised to see a small crowd gathered outside the town hall. Dawson stood at the center, his expression a mixture of excitement and nervousness. When he spotted Faye, he moved forward to help her dismount, taking Lily from her arms. "What's all this?" Faye asked, gesturing to the assembled townspeople. "A welcome," Dawson replied cryptically, guiding her toward the town hall steps where Mayor Turner stood with an official-looking document in his hands. "Miss Morgan," Turner began formally, "or perhaps I should say the future Mrs. Reed. On behalf of the town council and the citizens of Cottonwood Springs, I am pleased to present you with this deed." He handed the document to Faye, who accepted it with confusion. "Deed." "To the new infirmary," Turner explained, gesturing to the building behind him, a former boarding house that had stood vacant for months. "The town has voted unanimously to establish a proper medical facility, with you as its head nurse under Doc Sanders' supervision." Faye stared at the deed in her hands, stunned. "I don't understand, I'm not a trained nurse." "You have more practical experience than most," Doc Sanders interjected, stepping forward. "You've got a gift, Faye, a natural talent for healing. With proper books and guidance, you'll be more than qualified." "It was Dawson's idea," Turner added. "He approached the council last week, suggested the town needed a dedicated infirmary after what happened with the typhoid, said there was no one better suited to help run it than you." Faye turned to Dawson, overwhelmed. "You did this." "I just made the suggestion," Dawson said modestly. "The town did the rest. They all saw what I've always known, that you were born to help others." Tears welled in Faye's eyes as the significance of the gesture sank in. This wasn't just a job or a building, it was recognition of her abilities, a chance to use her natural talents in service to a community that had become her home. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, looking from Dawson to the assembled townspeople. "Say yes," Doc Sanders encouraged. "Say you'll help me train you properly, that you'll be my right hand in caring for this town." "Yes," Faye agreed, her voice strengthening with conviction. "Yes, of course I will." A cheer rose from the crowd, and Dawson pulled Faye and Lily into a tight embrace. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered against her hair. That evening, as they rode home together, Lily sleeping securely in Faye's arms, Dawson watched his future wife with undisguised admiration. "You've been quiet," he observed. "Having second thoughts about the infirmary?" "No," Faye assured him. "It's perfect. I'm just overwhelmed by how much has changed in such a short time. 2 months ago, I was a widow in all but name, raising our daughter alone. Now I'm engaged, about to start a new career with a family I never thought I'd have. Too much, too fast." Dawson asked, a hint of worry creeping into his voice. Faye shook her head, smiling. "No, it's like I've been holding my breath for 3 years and finally I can breathe again." The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a whirlwind of activity. Dawson completed the cabin expansion just days before the ceremony, proudly showing Faye the finished product, a comfortable home that retained the cozy charm of her original cabin, while providing the space their growing family needed. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, a perfect June day. Faye, who had spent the night at Doc Sanders's house as tradition dictated, stood before the mirror in the guest room, hardly recognizing the woman who stared back at her, Mrs. Turner and the seamstress had outdone themselves with the dress, a creation of ivory satin and delicate lace that somehow managed to be both elegant and practical. Her auburn hair was arranged in a simple but flattering style, adorned with wildflowers rather than an elaborate veil. "You look beautiful," Doc Sanders's wife Martha commented from the doorway, "like something from a painting." Faye smiled nervously. "Is Lily behaving herself?" "Like an angel," Martha assured her. "She's downstairs with my sister, dressed in that adorable little gown you made her." And before you ask, yes, Dawson has arrived. He's in the garden with the minister, looking about as nervous as a man can be without passing out. Faye laughed, her tension easing slightly. "That sounds like him. All confidence until the important moments, then nothing but nerves." "It's how you know he cares," Martha observed wisely. "The things that matter most make us the most afraid." A soft knock at the door heralded the arrival of Mayor Turner, who had offered to escort Faye in place of her father. "It's time, Miss Morgan," he announced, "if you're ready." Taking a deep breath, Faye nodded. "I've been ready for this day longer than I knew." The ceremony took place in Doc Sanders's garden, which had been transformed with flowers, ribbons, and rows of chairs to accommodate the entire town. As Faye walked down the makeshift aisle on Mayor Turner's arm, her eyes found Dawson standing beneath an arch of wildflowers, looking more handsome than she'd ever seen him in a new suit and polished boots. The moment their eyes met, the world around them seemed to fade away. There was only Dawson, the boy who had stolen her heart with his easy smile and grand dreams, now a man ready to build a life with her. When Mayor Turner placed her hand in Dawson's, Faye felt a sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. The minister's words washed over her promises of love, honor, and faithfulness that she and Dawson had already begun to live out in the weeks since his return. "I, Dawson James Reed, take you, Faye Elizabeth Morgan, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Dawson recited, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Faye repeated the vows, her voice clear and sure. When the time came to exchange rings, Dawson surprised her by producing not only his mother's band, which she had returned to him for the ceremony, but a second, newer ring with a small diamond that caught the sunlight. "Something old and something new," he whispered as he slipped both rings onto her finger. "Just like our love. By the power vested in me," the minister concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Reed, you may kiss your bride." Dawson needed no further encouragement. Gathering Faye into his arms, he kissed her with such tenderness and passion that the assembled guests erupted in cheers and applause. Only when Lily began to fuss in Martha's arms did they reluctantly part, both laughing as Dawson reached for their daughter and brought her into their first embrace as a legal family. The celebration that followed was exactly what Cottonwood Springs needed after the hardships of the typhoid outbreak, a joyous affirmation of life and love. The town hall had been decorated with wildflowers and lanterns, tables laden with food contributed by every household, and a small band played cheerful tunes that soon had guests dancing. Dawson and Faye moved through the celebration hand in hand, accepting congratulations and well wishes from their neighbors and friends. Doc Sanders made a heartfelt toast to the couple who had helped save the town, and Mayor Turner presented them with a hand-carved sign for their property that read Reed Family Ranch. As the evening progressed, Dawson pulled Faye onto the dance floor for a waltz. Holding her close, he marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Happy, Mrs. Reed," he murmured against her ear. Deliriously, Faye confirmed, leaning into his embrace. "Though I think Lily might be even happier, Mrs. Peterson has been feeding her cake when she thought I wasn't looking." Dawson chuckled, glancing over to where their daughter sat on the older woman's lap, her face smeared with frosting. "She deserves a little celebration, too. After all, she's the miracle that brought us back together." "Not the only miracle," Faye corrected softly. "Finding you alive after all this time. That was the first miracle." As the dance ended, Doc Sanders approached, an official-looking envelope in his hand. "Sorry to interrupt, but this arrived for you today, Dawson. Looks important." Dawson accepted the envelope with curiosity, opening it carefully. As he read the contents, his expression shifted from confusion to shock to unbridled joy. "Dawson?" Faye prompted, concern in her voice. "What is it?" "It's from the land office in Cheyenne," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "Remember that claim I filed years ago before the cattle drive, the one on the North Fork of the river?" Faye nodded, recalling his excitement about the parcel of land he'd discovered rich grazing territory with a reliable water source, perfect for the ranch they'd dreamed of building together. "I thought it was lost when they believed I was dead," Dawson continued. "But apparently, since there was no body and no official death certificate, the claim remained in limbo. This says the land is mine, ours." "The North Fork property?" Faye asked, stunned. "But that's less than 10 miles from here," Dawson finished. "Close enough to town for your work at the infirmary, but large enough for the ranch we always wanted." Faye threw her arms around his neck, laughing through happy tears. "Another miracle," she whispered. "We seem to be collecting them." As the celebration continued around them, Dawson and Faye stood in their own private moment of joy, the future unfolding before them like a road bathed in sunlight. The weeks following the wedding were a time of adjustment and planning. Dawson divided his time between making improvements to their cabin and surveying the North Fork property, mapping out where they would eventually build their ranch house and corrals. Faye, meanwhile, began her formal training with Doc Sanders, spending mornings at the new infirmary and afternoons with Lily. The arrangement suited her perfectly, allowing her to pursue her newfound calling while still being present for her daughter's early years. One evening in late summer, as they sat on their expanded porch watching the sunset, Lily playing with wooden blocks at their feet, Dawson reached for Faye's hand. "I've been thinking," he began, a hint of nervousness in his voice, "about the future." "What about it?" Faye asked, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I want more children," Dawson said simply. "Not right away if you're not ready, but someday, a brother or sister for Lily." Faye smiled, turning to face him. "I want that too, a house full of children with your blue eyes and stubborn chin." "And your kindness," Dawson added, touching her cheek gently. "Your courage." "It might happen sooner than you think," Faye said softly, her eyes holding a secret. "If my suspicions are correct." Dawson's eyes widened, his hand instinctively moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "Are you saying?" Faye nodded, placing her hand over his. "It's early days yet, but yes, our family is already growing." Joy suffused Dawson's features as he gathered Faye into his arms, being careful not to crush her. "Another miracle," he whispered against her hair. "Our life seems full of them lately," Faye agreed, laughing as Dawson lifted her from her chair and spun her around, prompting giggles from Lily, who watched her parents with delight. Setting Faye carefully back on her feet, Dawson knelt to scoop up Lily, bringing her into their embrace. "What do you think, little one? Ready to be a big sister?" Lily babbled happily in response, patting both her parents' faces with pudgy hands. As autumn painted the Wyoming landscape in vibrant hues of gold and crimson, Dawson and Faye began construction on their ranch house at the North Fork property. With help from friends in town and hired hands eager for work, the framework rose quickly against the backdrop of rolling hills and distant mountains. Faye's pregnancy progressed without complications, her work at the infirmary providing her with knowledge that eased the normal anxieties of expectant motherhood. Unlike her pregnancy with Lily, which she had faced alone and afraid, this time she was surrounded by support Dawson's unwavering devotion, Doc Sanders's medical expertise, and the friendship of the women in town who had come to respect and admire her. By December, with snow blanketing the ground and Christmas approaching, the main structure of the ranch house was complete enough to be closed in against the winter weather. Though they continued to live in the cabin, Dawson and Faye spent evenings by the fireplace planning the details of their new home, the furniture Dawson would craft, the curtains Faye would sew, the garden they would plant come spring. On Christmas Eve, they hosted a small gathering at the cabin. Doc Sanders and Martha, Mayor Turner and his wife, and a few close friends who had become like family over the past months. The modest space was transformed with evergreen boughs, candles, and simple decorations that Dawson had carved for Lily's first Christmas with both her parents. As they sat around the table enjoying the feast Faye had prepared, Doc Sanders raised his glass in a toast. "To the Reeds," he said warmly, "who remind us that even in the darkest times, love finds a way to bring us home." "To love," the guests echoed, glasses clinking in the warm glow of the fireplace. Later, after their guests had departed and Lily was asleep in her new room, Dawson presented Faye with a small wooden box, intricately carved with wildflowers and their intertwined initials. "Merry Christmas," he said, watching eagerly as she opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft fabric, lay a silver locket. When Faye opened it, she found a tiny portrait of Dawson on one side and Lily on the other, expertly painted by the schoolteacher who had a talent for miniatures. "It's beautiful," Faye breathed, touching the delicate engravings on the silver surface. "But how did you afford this?" "I've been saving bits from odd jobs," Dawson explained. "And I traded some carpentry work with the silversmith in Laramie when I went to file the final papers on the North Fork property." Faye reached beneath the tree for her gift to him, a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "It's not as fine as your gift," she warned as he unwrapped it. Inside was a new Stetson, similar to the one she had stolen years ago but of finer quality. "To replace the one I took," she explained. "Though I don't regret it, stealing that hat was the best decision I ever made," Dawson laughed, placing the hat on his head. "Perfect fit," he declared. "Though I hope you know, Mrs. Reed, that I'd let you steal my hat all over again, just for the chance to chase you through that meadow." "I know," Faye smiled, settling into his embrace before the fire. "And I'd run just slowly enough to let you catch me." Winter gave way to spring, the Wyoming landscape awakening with new life as wildflowers carpeted the prairie and leaves unfurled on the cottonwoods along the creek. Faye's pregnancy had progressed to its final months, her rounded belly a source of constant fascination for Lily, who had recently celebrated her first birthday. The ranch house at the North Fork property was nearing completion, with Dawson working tirelessly alongside hired hands to finish before the baby's arrival. He had purchased a small herd of cattle and several horses, the beginnings of the ranch they had dreamed of building together. One warm May afternoon, Faye was working in the garden behind their cabin when she felt the first contraction. Recognizing the signs from Lily's birth, she calmly called for Mrs. Peterson, who had been watching Lily while Dawson was at the North Fork property. "It's time," Faye explained, one hand pressed to her lower back. Can you send someone for Dawson and Doc Sanders? Mrs. Peterson, a grandmother many times over, immediately took charge, dispatching her grandson to fetch the men while helping Faye inside. By the time Dawson arrived, breathless and anxious, Faye's labor was well established. "I'm here," he assured her, taking her hand and pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I won't leave your side." Unlike Lily's birth, which Faye had endured alone in a stranger's home after fleeing her past, this delivery was surrounded by support Dawson's steady presence, Doc Sanders's medical expertise, and Martha's practical assistance. As evening deepened into night, Faye's labor intensified. Dawson remained steadfast, offering encouragement, wiping her brow, and enduring the crushing grip of her hand through contractions without complaint. "You're the strongest person I've ever known," he told her as she fought through a particularly difficult contraction. "You can do this, Faye. Our child is almost here." In the early hours of morning, with the first light of dawn peeking through the windows, their son was born, a robust baby with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. "He's perfect," Dawson whispered, tears streaming down his face as Doc Sanders placed the swaddled infant in Faye's arms. "Absolutely perfect." "Daniel," Faye said softly, touching the baby's tiny fingers. "Daniel James Reed. After my father," Dawson realized, deeply moved by the gesture. "And my middle name." "A strong name for a strong boy," Doc Sanders observed, cleaning his instruments. "Congratulations to you both." Later that day, after Faye had rested and Lily had been introduced to her new brother, Dawson sat beside the bed, one arm around his daughter and the other hand gently stroking his son's head. "I never imagined I could be this happy," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "When I was lost, separated from you, I never dreamed I would have all this." "Neither did I," Faye confessed. "After I thought I'd lost you, I was convinced that part of my life, the loving, hoping part, was over forever. Now look at us." Dawson leaned down to kiss her, a gentle affirmation of the love that had endured separation, grief, and joyful reunion. "Look at us indeed," he murmured against her lips. "A family, finally." By summer's end, they had moved into the ranch house at the North Fork property, a spacious, well-built home with room for their growing family, and the future they envisioned together. Dawson's cattle herd was thriving, and word of the quality of his stock had begun to spread, bringing buyers from as far as Cheyenne. Faye continued her work at the infirmary 2 days a week, her natural talent for healing now enhanced by formal training and experience. She had become an essential part of Cottonwood Springs' medical care, respected for both her skill and compassion. Life settled into a rhythm challenging but deeply satisfying. There were difficult days, of course, cattle lost to predators, minor injuries, the normal trials of raising 2 young children. But these challenges were faced together, strengthening rather than weakening the bond between Dawson and Faye. On the anniversary of Dawson's return to Cottonwood Springs, they stood together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold. Lily played nearby with the wooden horse Dawson had made her, while Daniel slept peacefully in Faye's arms. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Faye asked, leaning into Dawson's embrace. "If you hadn't been found by the Shoshone, if I hadn't come to Cottonwood Springs." "Every day," Dawson admitted, his arm tightening around her waist. "But I prefer to think about how right it all is now, how perfect." "Even with all the work, all the challenges," Faye teased, knowing his answer. "Especially with those," Dawson confirmed, turning to face her fully. "Building something worthwhile is never easy, Faye. But building this life with you, it's the greatest privilege I could ask for." Faye shifted Daniel to one arm so she could touch Dawson's face, tracing the scar along his jawline that served as a reminder of all they had overcome. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day when you found us?" Dawson nodded, covering her hand with his own. "I said I never stopped loving you, not for a single day. And I didn't believe you," Faye recalled with a small smile. I was so afraid to trust again, to hope. And now?" Dawson asked, his eyes reflecting the last golden rays of sunlight. "Now I know that some loves are strong enough to survive anything," Faye answered, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. "Even death, even time, even our own fears." As they stood together, silhouetted against the fading light, their children, the living embodiments of their enduring love, surrounded them. The girl who had once been a secret, unknown to her father, and the boy who represented their new beginning. A family forged through separation and reunion, grief and joy, loss and rediscovery. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the sound echoing across the open prairie. Dawson drew Faye closer, his eyes on the horizon where their land stretched out before them, land that would someday belong to Lily and Daniel, a legacy of the love that had brought their parents back together against all odds. "I was thinking," Dawson said as they turned to go inside, the evening air growing cool, "about expanding the house in a few years, adding another bedroom or two." Faye raised an eyebrow, amusement dancing in her eyes. "Planning ahead, Mr. Reed, always, Mrs. Reed," Dawson replied with a grin, lifting Lily into his arms as they crossed the threshold into their home. "Always." And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the Reed family gathered around their table, bound by love that had survived the ultimate test, a love born when a spirited young woman stole not just a cowboy's hat, but his heart as well. A love that had found its way home, against all odds, to create the family they had always been meant to be.